Alright, YouTube, I think it's time to clarify something because increasingly people are acting as though I'm on board with the Trump train still. I was briefly until the Mike Pence announcement. Now I back Gary Johnson again. I've qualified that, of course, by saying if you are in a swing state, if you're in a state where a week before the election it looks like it's in play, I would encourage you to vote for Trump as the lesser of two evils. Yeah, you should vote tactically. Otherwise, if you're in Vermont, California, maybe Wyoming or something, you should, I would encourage you to vote for Gary Johnson as the best candidate. Yes, a mediocre, sort of half-hearted libertarian, still better. Jill Stein's nuts. Clinton is corrupt as hell. Trump, I have some issues with some of his platforms. Just my feel of it. But when I analyze politics, when I analyze especially the Trump campaign or the Clinton campaign, the reason why I'm so fixated upon the failures of the Clinton campaign is because it's literally low-hanging fruit. It's the easiest thing in the world to pick through and figure out mistakes that Clinton or her staff or the DNC or Tim Kaine or any of these others are making. Their candidacy is falling apart right now. With between the DNC leaks, generally not too well received VP choice, and Mike Pence, on the other hand, was not greatly received except by sort of the RNC's insiders and the centrists and the far right within the party. It sort of alienated some of the independents. Between all of the bad choices and scandals involving the Democrats, especially as it relates to the actual campaign itself, it's very easy to criticize them because the campaign is not being run properly. Hillary's staffers appear to be inept. The DNC appears to be inept, and their only response, for instance, to the leaks situation going on right as they go into their convention, 2 days before the convention the DNC leaks hit, their only response has been to blame Russia, indicate that Putin and Trump are somehow in cahoots, to bring about some evil, hideous monstrosity of an alliance that involves somebody who, as you know, doesn't like gays. Now, I like to point out it was Hillary Clinton that was involved in selling U.S. uranium to Russia in a very questionable and for them lucrative deal, and I'm sure it was extremely lucrative for her. That was her doing. That had nothing to do with Trump, so I'm not sure why Putin would want to destroy his own cash cow, because that's exactly what Hillary Clinton is to him. I have a feeling that if he was going to try to stop anyone, he'd try to stop Trump, because he realizes that a deregulated market situation would vastly outstrip the Russian economy because the U.S. economy would enter an economic boom. That's my own feelings on it. But anyway, it's harder to criticize Trump's campaign. It's just more difficult to do it. Because when I was analyzing the primaries, everybody else very early on didn't take Trump seriously other than a very small group of people who jumped aboard with him because of his personality and because they saw that the front runner was a Bush, and the echoing call was no more Bushes, no more Clintons. I hold to that still. There's nothing in the world that could make me vote for a Clinton. It's just not gonna fucking happen. But then he won New Hampshire. He came in second in Iowa. He won in New Hampshire, which showed, yes, he's capable of winning a state. When he won in South Carolina, it became clear Jeb was no longer viable. He only had 3 viable opponents to begin with. Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, and Ted Cruz. They were the only viable opponents he had. Nobody else in that race mattered at all. Chris Christie never mattered. Rand Paul, for all of his positive qualities, never mattered, never had a chance. Ben Carson never mattered. Carly Fiorina and so forth. He had 3 viable opponents. He knocked Jeb out in South Carolina because he had to do well in the South to have any chance whatsoever. Especially since Jeb was massively outraising everybody else at the time. In Nevada, he essentially knocked Ted Cruz on his ass because Ted Cruz's strategy was to do well in the South and the Midwest and to pull a Reagan strategy. And then, of course, later on Super Tuesday, he essentially denied Marco Rubio too by gobbling up 7 of 13 states. By that point, I said there's now a much better than 50-50 chance of him winning. Probably upwards of 90% chance of him winning, because his strategy is working. Attempting to outraise Trump doesn't do anything. Putting ads on TV doesn't appear to do anything. Ted Cruz barely retained his home state in Texas. Marco Rubio lost his home state. Jeb Bush lost his home state. Whereas with the Clinton campaign, with the entire DNC on board with their campaign, having outraised and outspent their opponent by an order of magnitude in certain competitive regions, Hillary Clinton still did not manage to crush her opponent until the bitter end, and even then not by a huge margin, only to see the DNC leaks raise their ugly head and threaten her even at the convention in bringing party unity forward. The problem for Hillary Clinton is that she had one viable opponent who she was generally outmatching in every possible sense, and yet she couldn't put it away against him. He's older, he's a self-proclaimed socialist who doesn't do well with older voters and minorities, and yet she didn't do that well, really, against him. Trump, meanwhile, had three viable opponents quite long into the process, one of which held on until basically the end. Kasich became viable in the minds of some towards the end after having won his home state at least, but he was never viable to me. But it was perceived of as a viable opponent. He did raise quite a bit of money as well, and he wasn't half bad at campaigning, let's face it. He did well in his home state, he did well in New Hampshire, he did well a few other states. So, no problem there, but Trump managed to crush them out very early on. His most viable opponent, who was a Bush, who should be a massive fundraising apparatus personified as a human, got crushed under very quickly after Nevada. It was clear he no longer had a chance. In fact, as of Nevada, the fourth state to vote, my analysis began looking very positive for Trump. After Super Tuesday, it became almost certain he'd be the nominee. He had cleaned up 10 states out of the states that had voted. None of his opponents, other than Ted Cruz, had won more than one state at any point in the election. Marco Rubio won Minnesota. John Kasich won Ohio. The only kind of viable opponent he had left by Indiana was Ted Cruz. At that point, Trump crushed him out. I said, though, that after New York, it was certain that Trump would be the nominee. I stopped calling him the presumptive nominee. No other analyst appears to have actually accurately predicted these things. Nate Silver, well after Super Tuesday, was still calling him a flash in the pan. It would die out, he'd get crushed under by Cruz or Rubio or something. Their fundraising will take over. The honeymoon's over, and people will begin abandoning the Trump campaign. What they didn't understand, and I keep saying this, is that there is a paradigm shift going on in this election, whereby a significant proportion of the Democratic Party has embraced socialism and progressivism over corporate centrism. The Democrats made the mistake with going with the corporate centrist. What they don't understand is that those corporate centrists tend to be very partisan and would have voted for the Democrat anyway. If Bernie Sanders had been the nominee, other than hemorrhaging a few minorities and older voters tend not to be as democratic anyway. Other than that, he could have energized that fringe, he could have grabbed up independents on the anti-establishment platform, and things would have looked up for him. He would have been competitive. Hillary is not competitive. Her campaign is inept, for one thing. She's boring, for another thing. She's perceived of as untrustworthy. Right now, favorability of Trump and Clinton is almost in a dead tie. Trump's favorability is rising swiftly. Clinton's is declining swiftly, and that doesn't even take into consideration the DNC leaks. It doesn't even take into consideration the very real possibility of much larger protests at the DNC than the RNC, that the world will be fixated upon, making the party look even more disunified. It also doesn't generally comprehend her VP pick, because some of the polling hasn't ended yet that would include that period of time. And so I expect her favorability to crash and burn. She'll be at 65% unfavorability probably. Trump will be around 45 by the end. He will be the more favorable, trustworthy candidate, which the Democrats still are in denial about being a possibility. For months and months, they cast his candidacy as, well, it's fringe, there's no possible way they're going to let him be the nominee. When he became the nominee, he said, well, there's no way he could ever beat Hillary anyway. They were dismissive, and they in some cases still are, and yet he's tied with her nationally now. In the last 4 polls, 2 of them show Trump ahead. One shows Hillary ahead, the other shows a tie. They are tied. For all intents and purposes, they are now tied, with Clinton sinking lower, Trump slowly rising in the general, as well as in multiple swing states, and quickly rising in favorability. He doesn't have that much work ahead of him until the debate. But the sheer level of ineptitude, Michael Dukakis style, or Walter Mondale style, or maybe Al Gore style, in the Democratic campaign, as opposed to having a relatively charismatic head for the Republican Party, who has begun now to fundraise at large levels, largely from grassroots donations. Oh, isn't that going to endear him to the Bernies? The Bernie fans, hate to say it, would, if they had to choose, if at gunpoint they were told they had to choose between one of the major candidates, I have a feeling the majority would choose Trump. Why? Because Hillary Clinton's still getting about half of her money from a bunch of super PACs, while claiming that she wants to get rid of Citizens United. Trump's getting, I think it was 3 or 4% of his money from super PACs, the rest is grassroots, and he's actually raising a considerable sum of money. Yeah, he's being outraised and outspent by Clinton. So far, that hasn't been a handicap for him in this election. So far, he's spent very little. Here's the secret. Clinton's ads don't work because you spend a hell of a lot of money on a 15, 30-second ad. And some people see it, most people ignore it. Trump says something that gets media coverage, and it is essentially an ad in and of itself because he's there. He's going to attempt, over the next few days, I believe, to gobble up as much of the DNC's airtime as possible. With the upcoming second DNC leaks, I have a sneaking suspicion that one thing that those leaks will show, when Assange says, oh, well, the next release of emails virtually guarantees Clinton will be jailed. I don't believe that'll happen, by the way, but, you know, he's perhaps exaggerating slightly so that more people will anticipate it. I have a sneaking suspicion that somewhere around in those emails is floating around some sort of material that shows that some higher up within the DNC coordinated with at least one mid-level staffer within the Clinton campaign in order to cause chaos at Trump's rallies. I have a sneaking suspicion that paid agents were sent in order to cause havoc at these protests, cause them to become violent, to hijack the media narrative. I honestly think that probably is the case. In which case, people will go to jail. It won't be Hillary, but it won't look good, you know, when you realize that it's connected with her campaign. And that's really what the DNC leaks are about. This is going to really hurt her trustworthiness ranking. At the same time, Clinton herself is not personally involved in any of these emails. She's spoken of a lot. Her staffers are involved a lot. Her advisors and her campaign people, they're all involved. She herself is not. But she is going to be indicted in the court of public opinion by proxy anyway because it's from the DNC. And really should have known better than to allow her staff to issue a statement so dismissive of the DNC leaks. Her calling for Debbie Wasserman Schultz to step down means nothing to anybody. Nobody gives a fuck if she stays or goes. And then the person they put in her place also had to step down. They're on their third person in 2 days heading the DNC. I think it was Donna Brazil or something like that also was indicated within some of the leaks as having done perhaps some wrongdoing and had to step down. Or maybe it was something Fudge, I think her name is. I think she's the one that's reigning now. So they're on their third head of the DNC in less than 48 hours. And you think this is a unified party? It's so easy to criticize. Meanwhile, the Trump campaign, they're just sitting there. They hold a few rallies, Trump makes a few speeches, and he can basically do no wrong. He's even with an opponent who is outraising him by 3 or 4 times right now. With all the super PAC backing, with the backing of some notorious big spending Republican figures. And it's not helping them put it away against Trump. I don't see anything good on the horizon for Hillary. But don't think that that's an endorsement of Trump. I'm just pointing out the fucking obvious. Trump is running a coherent, cogent, well-thought-out campaign that is working. Hillary Clinton is running an inept, stupid campaign whose tactics date back several decades. It's no contest here. There is no contest. Doesn't matter how many Obamas and Bloombergs get on board. And by the way, Michael Bloomberg, I'll briefly address this. Nothing says captivating the Bernie Sanders fans and really getting those progressives back on board with your ticket than having a multi-billionaire Wall Street tycoon come out and endorse you at the DNC. Nothing could possibly be better than Michael Bloomberg's endorsement. Oh, what a wild time that will be. Or do you think that it's going to piss off these people who are anti-establishment further because it's another stack of establishment individuals endorsing and supporting Hillary Clinton? I think the latter. I don't think it's going to help her. I don't think anything at this point maybe can save her. Unless Trump, again, if he drops dead, well, yeah, all bets are off because then it's Mike Pence running for the presidency. Nobody gives a fuck about Mike Pence. Or, you know, he whips out his cock and starts beating off on stage on a group of midgets or something like that. Other than that, I can't see him really doing anything that could make him seem less, that could make him seem more inept or less trustworthy than Hillary has already doomed herself to through her own actions and the actions of her staff and her so-called allies. And the DNC might be remembered as the group most responsible for sinking her campaign. It won't even be like Jill Stein siphoning the Bernie vote or Gary Johnson siphoning some of the business Democrats. It'll be the DNC itself for being so fucking stupid. That's about all. Peace out.